Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for joining. I have to say, this is a huge pleasure and treat for me to have Stephen Marche here. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
All right, let's try this again.
Great.
Seems okay now. Sorry, I apologize, everybody.
Oh, no
Um,
problem.
Look, in a reader's life, occasionally you stumble across a book and it completely changes how you see things and sort of blows your mind. That happened to me when I stumbled across Stephen's Next Civil War. Um, I and you have to read this book because you think about when it was published, which was January 2022, right, Stephen?
That's right. Yeah.
And it is the most prescient book. Uh, it's just extraordinary, and we'll get into it. But see, what can you start with? Kind of, you're in Canada, political
Yeah.
writer. Have the mixed pleasure of being an observer of American politics. Um, can you tell us just a little bit about your background and
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was, I've was when I came to the next Civil War, I guess I would have been working in America for about 10 years. I was a
yeah,
columnist at Esquire during all that time. And I was also before that, I was a professor in New York. So I lived in America. I'd worked in America.
right,
I mean, until recently, like I never thought of that as being a kind of big gap, like the Canadian American gap. Although like until I was 33, you didn't need a passport to cross the border into America,
yeah, that's
right?
right.
So it was like so it was so I thought there was enough. I was familiar with American life, but also I had a slight distinction from it, like a
Distance,
slight
yeah,
difference from it and distance from it, and so I could sort of see it a little more clearly than I think American commentators could see it. I think that's one of the major advantages of the book. I'm not really one of the tribes that are described in this
hmm,
book, one of the blue side or the red side. I really am an outsider to that. And so, the book is based on an article I wrote in 2018. And so I think even by 2018, it was pretty apparent to me that the sort of deep structural problems that American democracy faced were very substantial and were really not. I mean, I just could not see anyone addressing them or finding a way to address them in any meaningful way. And then I began sort of. I began crisscrossing America, meeting with white power groups, meeting with far right militias, meeting with far left groups, meeting with groups that probably would be classified as violent left wing insurgents groups, but mostly just talking to experts on agriculture, on political division, on hyperpartisanship, on assassination and its outpass, which the chapter about that in
right.
is particularly relevant this week, unfortunately. I mean, unfortunately, chapters keep being relevant, which is not something I wanted. I hoped this was going to be the kind of book where it'd be like, who was that idiot who
Who is
wrote
this
that book
idiot?
about,
Right.
like you see it in some scrap heap used bookstore, and you're like, who was dumb enough to write a book about that? That's really what I hoped would happen with it, but I don't.
Yeah.
I
Well, that
think
didn't
that
happen, Stephen.
no, that did not happen. That's for sure. But so the inequality questions, the sort of deep structural questions, and the decline of trust in institutions, those sorts of questions. I really didn't create any models. I just took the best models and tried to explain
Hmm.
in the clearest way I could the strengths and weaknesses of them. Like the agricultural models are gold. They absolutely apply across the board. Economic models are basically not worth the paper they're written on. But I put both in just with an explanation of which ones, have real
Right.
efficacy and which ones don't. And so from that, I tried to produce a portrait, just put basically skin on the bones of these models to make it less dry. So I put it in these scenarios that were, I guess you could call them speculative nonfiction, but it was really just an attempt to show where the models were heading, and because they really are like I think they are a huge alarm bell for anyone who loves the United States,
Yeah.
and in which I firmly include myself even as a foreigner. So that's why I wrote the book.
Well, Sam, if you could just put up the opening of this book. Um, I mean, I just have to read through and think that this is published in 22, which means you really wrote it in 21. I
Really, I
mean,
wrote it in 2020.
yeah, 2020. I mean,
Yeah.
the United States is coming to an end. The question is how. Every government, every business, every person alive will be affected by the answer. The unimaginable has become every day in America. Buffoonish mobs desecrating the U.S. Capitol building, tear gas and tanks on the streets of Washington, D.C., running battles between protesters and militia, armed rebels attempting to kidnap sitting governors, uncertainty about the peaceful transition of power. Reading about them in another country, you would think a civil war has already begun. The United States is descending into that kind of sectarian conflict usually found in poor countries with histories of violence, not the world's most enduring democracy and largest economy. The fall has been sudden. A decade ago, American global supremacy was a given. The memory of September 11th led to mass demonstrations of national unity. The United States was synonymous with the glory of democracy. No longer. Solidarity has dissolved. The American system has become a case study of paralysis. Political violence is on the rise. I mean, that's stunning. It's as
Yeah.
if you picked up, a pen and said, "Okay, after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I'm going to write something."
Well, the trends were very apparent. Like, and like the only reason that people didn't believe them really is that they thought America was an exception. Like they thought that America was an exceptional country in the world, that literally the forces of history that applied everywhere else in the world, South America, Europe, Asia, wherever, would not affect it. And there were some reasons, I guess, for believing that, because the United States is a totally exceptional country in a whole bunch of categories. I mean, ironically, the most exceptional category of the United States is its diversity, right? Like there just is no country with any, even certainly Canada's nowhere close. Like there
Right.
is no country with anywhere near the diversity of the United States. The so that if you operate on the assumption that ordinary political realities apply to the United States as they do to, say, Brazil and Argentina and Germany and Italy and the UK, then it's very clear. Then it was obvious, even in 2018, where this was all headed. I think there still is a certain kind of exceptionalism. I mean, because I don't. What I really don't see in the United States is any attempt to understand, like, to pull back from the brink of this and what it is. Like, it just seems to be people running headlong into what is, just a nightmare. Like, and
Yeah,
is a nightmare everywhere, and will certainly be a nightmare for the United States.
it. I've thought for a long time about Donald Trump that he benefits because the unimaginable is hard to imagine, and
Yeah.
the impossibility of Donald Trump gives him great power. And in 2016, I was a perfect example of that. Somebody who'd worked in the Republican Party for decades. I didn't think he'd win the nomination. I didn't think he'd win the general. And certainly after Access Hollywood came out, this guy could be
Right.
elected, president of the United States. And then why is it that Mitch McConnell and others didn't vote to convict him in the Senate after he tried to organize a mob to kill his colleagues? Well, in part because they're cowards, which is more
Yeah.
than anything else. But in part, they convinced themselves it wasn't necessary. Why? Because in America, Donald Trump could not come back after
Right.
this. And here we are. And, I think if a lot of us a year ago I said there's going to be an army of masked men in the streets chasing gardeners through Brentwood with a budget larger than the Marines, larger
Yeah.
than any military except for two countries in the world.
Yeah.
That you're going to have the complete dismantling of a public health system in America. Uh, this would have seemed, he said, look, just calm down, dude. And
Right.
but you
Yeah.
wouldn't have because you were able to do it. Now, is it fair to say that your premise is really that a civil war has started in America? We just have been slow to recognize it.
Well, the technical definition, like I really tried in this book to stay super technical. I
Yep.
think there's like a lot of rhetoric and like, and I think my value proposition is that I'm not a screamer, right? Like that's going to limit my career in a very lot of ways, but I really don't want to participate in this left wing, right wing screaming matches. They just are of zero interest to me, and
Yeah.
I think they really hurt discourse. Um, but I would say like the technical definition of a civil war is 1,000 combatant deaths a year. I'm not sure even if America were to attain that, it would be particularly meaningful because that's often in countries like Liberia or Sierra Leone, where they're much smaller geographically, and 1,000 combatant deaths is much more meaningful. America is just so big and so varied that I'm not sure what the exact definition point would be, but whatever definition, it isn't in there yet. However, the Civil War that I'm imagining here is not gray coats and blue coats lined up on either side of a border shooting or either side of a river shooting each other, right? Like it's just the rise of political violence and the attempt to impose order on it, and that leading to more violence, right? And just this America is obviously in a great surge of political violence right now. I think it is fair to compare current day America, like America right now, to Ireland in the Troubles or Italy during the Days of Blood, right? So I guess you would call that low level civil conflict,
Yeah.
but also any attempt to walk back from that. I mean, the president is asked, "What are you going to on Fox News? What are you going to do to unify this country?" He says, "I'm not going to do anything." You see, like people on the left, like, and not small numbers, like extremists, like just broad groups of people thinking Charlie Kirk had it coming. It's probably good that he's dead, right? And that's just like I don't think they understand just how toxic that is. Like if you're in a world where people are assassinated for expressing really whatever, I mean, horrific views, like you're just not in a safe space for any journals. And of course, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine if you told me 10 years ago that an American president would use a Republican president, even crazier, would use bureaucracy to shut down a late night comic who offended him. I would have described that as the absolute definition of un-American, right?
Yeah.
Like that would have been the most un-American thing that you could imagine happening. It just happened. So I think we're at the bottom of the threshold of this. Like when I wrote this, it was like the year that I was thinking of was probably 2040, right? That was when America was set to become a
Minority
minority
majority
majority,
country.
and that's all around the world. Wherever that happens, there's violence, right? Like that's not something to do with white
Mhm.
people. It's not something that happens in Africa, that happens in Europe, it happens everywhere, right? Like that's not something unique to America's history of racism, shall we say? Like it's got nothing to do with that. So that they certainly see it all over India, right? So like when you're dealing with these, what I really didn't predict, like, there were a couple of things I actually didn't see coming that are actually kind of interesting. I didn't see the legal system collapsing, like civil society institutions collapsing in anywhere near the speed which they have, right? Like I thought that took a decade, right? Like to like weaken the university system and the super, and also it just seemed to me incredible that anyone would destroy the scientific establishment that America had. I mean, literally every country in the world was desperately trying to imitate that, right? Like trying to get a scrap of it, right? For them for their own countries, and to just do away with it because you're I don't know, annoyed at scientists. It's so
I,
crazy that it just doesn't seem like it's so recklessly self-destructive that it just never occurred to me that would happen, because that's power, right? Like you're actually scrapping power. Like it's not like
so is killing USAID.
you're dealing with real self weakening on a conscious level, which I just did not I just didn't think would happen.
Yeah, voting. I said, voting for Donald Trump is a murder suicide pact for the country.
Yeah, right,
Um, I, as everyone said, what's the difference between January 6th and Fort Sumter? Nobody died at Fort Sumter.
right,
And one of the themes of your book are chapters that you dealt with, which I just found as a seventh generation Mississippian named for a Civil War cavalry general.
right. Oh,
I
were you really?
Yep,
You
yep.
named after
Well, I was
Stuart?
named for a relative who was named for a Civil War cavalry general,
Which one?
Stuart.
Okay, right.
Um,
Okay,
I had I had a relative that was a cavalry general for the Confederacy, and when he came back, he had
right,
7 sons and named them all for other Confederate things. So I could have been Zollicoffer. So
right.
probably given the because I
Or
had
Forest,
yeah, it probably worked
right?
out.
Yeah,
Um,
no doubt.
but it the idea why is this happening? I mean,
Mm,
I think it's in a way it doesn't matter why Donald Trump is doing this and why Republicans are
yeah,
going along with it. But on some level, I think it does. I mean, there is a very simple narrative here, and that is we know that the Russians helped elect Donald Trump. I mean,
right.
Marco Rubio Senate Intelligence Committee concluded that he won. What did they get? Well, when you make a list of all the things you were going through, the basic systematic unraveling and deconstruction of the pillars of American civil society, which is the pillars of American power, from the Federal Reserve to the CIA to the FBI.
Right.
Um, it makes sense if you say, if you had someone who was a Russian operative who got elected president of the United States, a kind of Tom Clancy novel thing.
I know.
What would they be doing? And it's very hard to come up with something that is different than what they're doing.
No, no. I mean, he's very destructive, but I mean, I sort of the epigram to the next Civil War is from Lincoln's address to the Lyceum, where he says, we're no one is ever going to destroy us from outside.
Yeah,
We're too powerful, and we have the mountains, and we have the two oceans. If we're either going to die by suicide or live by all time, or live for all time, right? And like I think when you're looking at the question of why, like the partly, I mean, the one date, like I asked the same question of all these experts, like where did this begin? Like when did it like when and they all gave the same answer for different reasons. And the answer was always 2008, right? And like and 2008 was a very important, that was the beginning of the end of the middle class dream, really, right? In the United States, or the idea that every generation would do better than the one before. That ended in 2008. Then you have there are other military questions, and there's obviously the election of Barack Obama and the whole symbolism of what that meant. Um, I think like, so they all had their reasons for 2008. Well, actually, some of them didn't even have reasons. It's just like that's where the chart starts moving, right? Like that, like they just noticed
yeah,
that's where the chart starts moving. Um, like the decline in trust in institutions in the United States has been pretty consistently underway since the late 60s, right? I mean, Robert Redford just died. I rewatched All the President's Men. It just is a different entire moral universe. I mean, because they're tackling corruption or something. Like the idea that like no one in any decent position of power would lie. Like like that's a given for them. That's a given for that entire framework. So I think
just
when we're actually looking for like the deeper reasons, like they're not gonna. It's not gonna be some incredibly successful Russian agent. It's not even going to be Donald Trump, who's a symptom as much as a cause. The question
yeah,
is going to be, when did this decline in trust really start moving to a place where essentially now like there's competitive bloodlust over, rather than rhetorical reality, right? Or some attempt to get at any kind of public reality. And this book does not have an answer to that question. Like, I'm just going to tell you straight out. Like,
Yeah.
I'm dealing with what I can really establish. That's all I wanted to do in this book, is like what I know, what the models say, who says them, how valid they are on a historical basis. You make up your own mind. Like, that's what I was trying to do. But that enormous philosophical question about basically what happened to the American spirit of solidarity is a very like, that's a very profound question, and I'm not sure I've not heard the answer where I was like, oh, that's it. I'll tell you that. And I don't have the answer either. Right.
And
Like, I think it's very hard to figure out what that is.
I have I have a theory I want to run by you. But
Am I
Sam,
about
can
to
you just
learn it
put up
now? That
the
would be
book
great.
cover
Yeah.
again, just so that everybody can see it? Because really, I think this is one of the most important books of our time, and I think it's become
Thank you.
more important as we've gone along. Um, so what, as somebody who worked in the Republican Party,
Right.
if you put me up in front of the Oxford Union and said uh, to debate resolved the Republican Party became an extremist movement, not a traditional American party.
Right.
I could argue that very credibly. Maybe I wouldn't
Right.
win the debate, but I think that there, and I've been thinking about this a lot, Stephen. I think there was something that we did in the Republican Party that rewarded weakness and compliance,
Mm,
and we did it for decades.
right.
And when you do that, it's like a genetic experiment. How do you end up with a Congress of Republicans, of people getting elected to Congress, the United States, or Congress? It's a Senate. It's a real pain in the ass. I mean, it's a lot of trouble. It disrupts
And
your
money.
life. You don't get paid a lot of money. So
Yeah.
all these people that went through all this and they won, and now, particularly in the Senate, it's as if they've resigned. You
Oh,
know, I don't
it,
understand why they go to work.
it's totally incredible to me.
And so,
I
how did
mean,
that happen? So, look,
yeah.
I would argue that the original sin of this is race. That
Mm,
in a country that is so diverse, when you had one party that rejected diversity, that go to 1956, Eisenhower gets 39% of the black vote.
right.
1964, Goldwater gets 7%.
Right.
2008, Trump, 2020, Trump, or 2016, Trump gets 8%. That's 1 point increase in 56 years.
Right.
And in that period, those of us in the Republican Party, we became very good at appealing to a very homogeneous audience.
Yeah.
And we evolved a sort of ethos that you move up because it's your turn.
Mm,
And that creates those
hierarchies.
willing to be compliant, willing to go along, are the ones
Yeah.
that then rise in the system. Um, I, it's an amorphous idea, but something happened. And
Yeah.
I really do think there is no both sidism here. I go back to, so like I worked for Bush in 2004, and
Right.
people forget this, but on election night, Bush did not declare victory because Ohio had not been declared, and there theoretically were enough votes out in what we call provisional ballots that if an overwhelming majority of them went for John Kerry, he could still win Ohio, which would mean he'd still win the presidency. Now, it
Right.
would have required him to win like 80% of them. We knew it wasn't going to happen. But I can just remember this vividly. The president would not go out and do that.
Right.
But say the next day when George Bush went out and said, did this kind of weird thing at the RNC, it was the most sort of modest of celebrations.
Yeah.
If John Kerry said, "No, I won," he's wrong. What would the Democratic Party have done? They would have said, "You've lost your fucking mind.
Right.
Like, shut up! You're destroying us."
Yeah.
And the New York Times would have called for his head.
Yeah.
And what happened when Donald Trump did that? 95% of Republican office holders went along with it.
Right. Well, look, I think, you know, I mean, a couple of points. So, not that I'm a defender in any way of the current iteration of the Republican Party, right? Like, I think David Frum said it best when he said, like, you should pray to God every night that you don't need anything in this life as much as Republicans need power, as much as those Republican congressmen need to stay in office, right? Because like it is forcing them to lose everything, right? But you know, if you look at the racial resentment metrics, which are really they're better gauge than like racism or racial attitudes because they're just much more reliable, and they're not, you're not self-identifying. You know, it's very hard to look into a person's heart and feel if they
Yeah.
have hatred or not, right? But racial resentment is a much more reliable metric. Those were identical for Democratic and Republican voters as recently as 2000. Right now, it's gone completely divided. The Republicans are
Well,
way higher level of racial resentment
so
than the Democrats. But I also just want to point out to you, the
yeah.
Democratic elite in this country, under the threat of authoritarianism in the United States, has caved as in a way that I found completely unpredictable. I mean, they had to strap my grandfather to the at 17 to the back of a Hamilton bomber to defend democracy, right? Like that's what he did for democracy. These people won't take a pay cut. Like, I mean, what you're boggled with in the Republicans, I am similarly boggled with by the university presidents, by the law firms, by all of it. I mean, it's such an incredible caving. Like
So
and it will not be forgiven. You know,
no,
like
I listen, man. I think a lot about in the 1930s when you had a huge fascist movement in America. Why didn't America become fascist?
right,
And probably because FDR was president and not
yeah,
Lindbergh or Henry Ford. So maybe, that thing that we used to study in civics classes when we still had them, leaders matter. So like I
yeah,
work for Romney and I'm sort of obsessed with this.
yeah,
So if Romney had gotten elected president, it would have been the same Republican Party, but he would have led it in a very different direction. But, you know, when Trump won, there's a lot of my Republican crowd, Bush crowd, compassionate conservative crowd, you know, our little tribe, who wanted to say that he had hijacked the party.
right.
But that never made sense to me because, when the hijacker stands up on the plane and hijacks the plane, people are not happy on that plane. It's not like, okay, we don't have to go to grandma's, we can go to Cuba. Fuck yeah, this is great. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, dude.
Yeah.
No, they want to kill the guy. And they
Yeah.
love Trump. So my conclusion was that Trump didn't change the party, he revealed the party. And he
Yeah.
gave people permission to be their worst self.
Yes.
And when
Yes.
once
100%.
politics does that,
Yeah.
what boundaries are still there?
Well, I mean, here's the question to really ask: is it even politics anymore? I mean, it's
Yeah.
actually something closer to an because no one's talking about policy. You know, no one's talking about like what should we do X, Y, Z to build X in the like
I
that's not what America's
listen, I look
engaged in.
back at these, there's a guy named Joe Trippi who's part of the Lincoln Project now,
Oh yeah, sure.
who
I've
was,
talked to
I
him.
think, the best Democratic consultant of his generation. I hated
Right.
going up against him. He was so fucking good. So when Joe and I talk about the campaigns we used to have, and we were
Right.
arguing like viciously about whether or not the capital gains tax should be 32 or 28%.
Right.
I mean, it's
That's
like,
politics.
great. I mean, it's like, a
You know, the
faculty
real
meeting
transformational
arguing over
figure.
parking places.
Yeah, the real transformational figure would have been George Romney. If George Romney had been president, that would have been a whole you'd be living in a whole different country. George Romney is one of the most fascinating American
Yeah.
politicians ever. I mean, he got 62% of the African American vote in Minnesota, wasn't it? Like he was pro civil rights in the Republican Party in 1962, 1964. A real pro. I mean, yeah, the very interesting man, George Romney.
Born in
Like he
Mexico.
born in Mexico to in like let's not libel anyone, but a polygamous group that, and managed to scratch his way to a fortune out of real hard scrabble realities. Fascinating man, George Romney. But I mean, when you think about men like that, like I don't know why is it that the worst people of every form are in power everywhere? Like this is a question we're going to have to ask ourselves,
I
right?
mean,
Like why
are
is it
they?
that the
I mean, is there any?
well, Donald Trump is in America, Bibi Netanyahu's in Israel.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, Putin is in Russia. Putin's like the worst possible expression of Russia.
Macron
These are
isn't that way. Uh,
who isn't?
Macron isn't that way. I mean, and
No,
Stammer's not that way, and your guy in Canada is not that way. Um,
but
it,
I mean, it's on a knife edge in all of these places. Macron is probably in a collapsing government.
yeah.
Starmer is like under. I mean, his popularity, like they just had 110,000. Like they just went through Brexit and did not recover, and they seem to want to do it all over again, right? They seem to
Yeah,
like
no, the Brexit parallels are really fascinating. Except I'd love to have a separate conversation. When that was happening, they reached out to me, the Brexit side, to help with debate prep for Nigel Farage.
right?
I thought, well, I don't
Oh
know.
my
That's
god!
like interesting. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't know anything
Sure.
about Nigel. But I went over
Yeah.
there, met with him, got on a plane, and came back. I thought they were the
Right.
craziest motherfuckers I'd ever met. Like, what these
Right.
people? And they all knew that it was a lie. And
Right.
the
They
whole,
can read papers as well as anyone else,
yeah.
right?
I mean,
Yeah.
they just knew it. And I think to a certain degree, they didn't ever imagine that they would win.
Oh, definitely. No one is predicated on the sense of I'm going to win and then I'm going to do X, Y, Z.
Right.
No one, absolutely no, none of these. It's all resentment, and I don't think the voters are either. Right? Like I don't think the voters are. I mean, that's part of the next civil war. Is like when you have this lack of trust in institutions and you have a lack of sense that policy can actually emanate from your politics, then it becomes an aesthetic game where you may as well scream at each other, right? Like because you're not going to. I mean, like I remember covering the 2016 election so I covered the Canadian election in 2015, and then I crossed which is, it's like, just like you said, sir, I want to increase education funding by 28 million. That's insane. We can only afford 24 million.
All
Like
right,
that's the
Jane,
kind
you
of
ignorant slut. No.
yeah, exactly. Jane, you ignorant slut. It can only be $24 million. Like it's boring, and no one pays attention because it's so boring. And then I went and saw a Trump and a Sanders rally in Iowa, and Trump is Trump going, like, doing this essentially WWE match without an opponent in front of a crowd in a broken town in Iowa. And then Sanders is going on about socialism, and he uses it like it's this like really like dirty word that everyone's going to be turned on by, or like some kind of religious concept. It's like, I've just come from Canada. I know what socialist medicine and all of it looks like. It's really boring. Like it's not the kind of thing that you like. It's a bunch of meetings is what it is. Like it's incredibly banal. But it was treated with this like religious, ideation around it, right?
Interesting.
And so, well, it's exactly this thing you're talking about. Like, where are the policies, right? Where is the space
Well,
for actual policy
so I
discussion
would
in American
argue this.
politics now?
I would, I
Yeah,
would, I would make the case, and I may have. Well, I do have a lot of guilt, and that may be completely, you know,
right,
coloring my theory. But I think that today, if you ask an American conservative, what is the American conservative theory of government? No one could answer that in any credible fashion. You could
right,
ask Elizabeth Warren her theory of government, and she can articulate that. It may be,
right.
you may disagree with it. You may think she's nuts as a bunny, but I mean, we're now the party, Republic. I say we. I'm not a Republican anymore, but we're nationalizing Intel. So
So
we've lost. The Republican Party's in the process of losing its mind over a guy running for mayor, talking about maybe 5 city-owned grocery stores, and we're nationalizing Intel. Really? I mean, you
well,
really,
and
really?
tariffs.
We're going to do
I
that?
mean,
We're going to
tariffs.
national. And if anybody thinks that Intel's going to stop at Intel, they're not going to go after Apple and Meta and Google. Of course they are.
They got some plus deal apparently, so they're like they're buying like social media networks, parts of them.
Yeah. I mean, and there is, it's not just that the Republican Party drifted away from what it was for. That happens in all parties. It
Right,
became the opposite of what it was. For decades, the single greatest adversary of the Soviet Union, then an expansive Russia, was a conservative element of the Republican Party, and now it's a
right.
pro-Putin I mean, I just,
Yeah.
I mean, I,
See, it
I
is very
do think the
interesting how.
Democratic, I just say this, I do
Yeah.
think the Democratic Party has kept faith with some sense of what it was to be a Democrat. You
Yeah.
know, I
Well, I mean, when I went around, like I mean, you're right that they're not comparable. Like this is not a both sidesism
right.
argument, right? Like one president is talking about conquering my country, right? That's only one side of the party, right?
Yes.
Like, so
Oh yeah,
let's just be clear about where
that.
my loyalties lie, right? Like the Democrats are not. Um, when the Republic, when the Democratic movement uh, became extremely based in identity based ideologies, and they really became quite toxic to themselves, and they lost the capacity to self-govern and to build coalitions which are integral to any democratic policies, right? And so my point is, like, what happened with the loss of policy on the Republican side, there was a corollary on the Democratic side, right? Like it's not quite the same. It's not the incredible, I mean, literally, you can take like a Republican position in 1989, on the economy, on foreign policy, and it's literally inverted now from what it was. So that hasn't had to happen to the Democratic Party, but they did lose a sense of like, we are the party of building things for ordinary people, right? And they became a party of a very narrow elite intellectual activity that, that's not who they are here. That's not really who they are in the UK either, right? Like they became a small subset of Ivy League educated people involved in a very elaborated etiquette that really reduced their capacity to govern. And I don't mean that in the sense of like the politics of it, because they were able to navigate that actually well enough, given how bad they were at what they were given the circular firing squad they turned themselves into. But they lost focus on what they should be, on what politics is. Politics is not a redemption of the human spirit, right? Like it is a business of building a better society through the management of a country's resources, right? And I think, like again, I don't want to be both sides about it, because I don't think they're comparable. But
Mhm.
the processes that were underneath the Republican splintering were also under the left wing splintering. I mean, that's, I think, what's really important to focus on is that process of shattering, right? That it is rending America, right? And it's affecting everyone. And like, it is
And
going to probably cost you your country.
I
Like,
confess, not, I haven't read the last election, your subsequent books.
right.
Do you
Yeah.
get into that a lot in the last election?
Well, the last election was more like this. This is not based. This is has very little on electoral politics,
Yeah.
right? Like in fact, it was an attempt to escape the cycle of being shocked by electoral politics, like trying to understand what's going on underneath them. But with Andrew, he gave me complete access to all of his consultants and all of his,
Yeah.
and the hardcore people, the people who are run smear campaigns, and the people who do negative polling, like all the dark arts of it. Like I got access to all of them, right? And he was more than happy to shape a narrative using those people. And of course, like 5 minutes after talking to these people, the brokenness of the next civil war is like, oh, that's nothing. Like it's amazing. Like, I asked Andrew, like, what are the three most important days in a political campaign? He said, first quarterly fundraising report, second quarterly fundraising report, third quarterly fundraising report. I mean, the political class in the United States is an entertainment industry that is directed towards fundraising, right? That's what becomes very clear when you talk to people. That's why, entertainers don't resign, right? Like people who are like, singers, they don't resign. It's just the crowd stops showing up. And that's why I think none of these Republicans will resign. They're not in the business of actually governing. They're in this.
You're not a governing.
They're not.
No,
They
no.
don't care. I mean, people like in Canada and the UK, ministers resign all the time, and they're much more respected for doing that, When people resign, you know they're serious, and you'll know they'll be back in politics, because those are exactly the kind of people you want running things. People who are like, I'm not doing this. This is not correct for the country. Goodbye, myself. You can forward my last check to XYZ. Like, those are the people you actually. But they're not. They're not Republican and Democrat. They're not in the business of governing. They're in the business of playing to a base to raise money, right? And that's what became very clear writing the next election. And so when that's the incentive structure that underlies your politics, how well can it go, right?
And I've
You
become,
know,
look, I'm incredibly hypocritical about this because, I was a political consultant, a media consultant, and
right,
media consultants are generally paid on a percentage of the dollars spent on television. So,
right, right.
um,
So you would know this all.
I mean, so
Yeah.
it's the only recession-proof business ever. Every year we
Right.
spend more money in politics. But,
Yes.
I worked in a good number of other countries that have very different systems. And I've become very radicalized on campaign finance. I would have
Yeah.
uh, uh, absolute limits. I'd have public funding for everything. I think it's one of these things. If you think about it 5 minutes, it seems easy. If you think about it 15, it seems impossible, because
Right.
you can argue against that. But I would be for it. I mean, I think
Oh, I'm for it.
yeah, that it
Mm.
really, and I think one of the darkest legacies of President Obama is that he rejected public financing for the general election campaign. And people
Yes.
forget this. Post Watergate, we did have a system that both parties could voluntarily accept, and an agreement not to spend more than the prescribed amount that they would get from the government. They would
Right.
get this money from the government. And having worked in campaigns that were under that system, I mean, literally, Stephen, when you gave your acceptance speech at the convention and you walked off, there was somebody there from the Treasury with a check. It was,
Right.
around $80 million. And we would always be like, can you wire this? And they go, no, we do checks. We're in the check business, dude. We're not going to wire you
They
this.
wouldn't wire it.
No. So,
Hand you a
then
piece
we
of
do this whole
paper.
thing of chartering planes to fly. So you could, anyway, this is why, you know, and it dawned on us in Bush world. It's so obvious, but in 2000 we had the Republican convention in July, and then we realized, well, shit, we're going to get the same amount of money. Let's have it as late as possible, so we'll have a more compressed time period to spend that money. So we did it. You're required by law. We're required to do it 60 days for the election. So we had it as late as possible in August, that he could accept the nomination. So then you go to 2008, and you know Obama as a candidate said that he would accept public funding. Everybody did. I mean, it wasn't even an issue.
Yeah.
It's like, you do. And then they realized how much money they could raise on the
Yeah.
internet. And I'll say this, David Plouffe wrote a book, The Audacity to Win, one of the managers was a manager of the Obama campaign. And
Right.
David is very honest about it. I give him a lot of credit for this. He said, we
Yeah.
did it because we knew we could get away with it.
Right.
So he ended up spending
Oh my God. That's the
750.
epitaph of the United States.
And
Jesus.
people get it confused, and they go, well, that's just because Citizens United. And it's, no. Citizens United was 2 years later.
Yeah, you can see
But
it. I mean,
anyway,
when you look at the charts, you can just see it go right
yeah.
up. But it's before. I mean, Citizens United was gasoline on the fire, right? Like, Citizens United were just going to go all the
So
way
toxic.
here. But
Look, I can't keep you all day, but I can't let you go without asking, what's going to happen?
well, I don't know. I mean, look, study the models. Like, I really want to. Like, this book is based on the models that I interpreted and that I selected, and its strength is theirs, right? Like, the weaknesses are mine, the strengths are theirs. The models don't tell you where the future is going. What they tell you is that political instability tends to grow. Now, there is another, like, this is a book about the vulnerabilities of late democracy for sure, but there is something else to consider, which is that the very worst democracies are incredibly better at virtually every aspect of running a country than authoritarian ones are. And I think we're already starting to see in the authoritarian decline in the United States, it's a much less well-managed country, and everyone knows it. Everyone's going, almost everyone, like there's a tiny little group that isn't going to get poorer, but almost everyone's about to get poorer. That's what happened in Hungary. I mean, people have this impression about authoritarians, like the trains run on time. It's the exact opposite. I
Yeah.
mean, to borrow money from the bank in Turkey right now, it's at 33%. Right? They've been in a permanent economic crisis since Erdogan took power. Right? Like you can't build a business in, or own or build something in Russia or Hungary. Hungary's had zero growth since Orban took power. Like these are not societies that anyone wants to be in. Right? Like that you can't have control over your own destiny in these places. It just is not true. So it's worth remembering that the reason people choose democracy in the end is because it's so much better than the alternatives. I mean, if you're asking me what I think is going to happen, I think we're already starting to see that the major form of resistance comes from the states. You're going to have blue state resistance of various kinds. It's already, like, when the government says I'm going to, we're going to go into Chicago. The governor puts up a fight. It seems to be enough.
Yeah.
I think the second strongest person. I mean, Donald Trump has more power than anyone in America. The last person who had as much power as Donald Trump has right now in the United States was George III, right? But like the second person who has power is Newsom, right? And I think he is starting to feel like you can do things against the federal government and guarantee your political survival, right? So that's those are all. I think. I mean, if you're asking me for a prediction as useless as they are, I would say a kind of soft secession within federalism is probably underway. But I mean, the violence is only growing, and that I think it's very terrifying to think about where that can lead, because I don't see any attempt to slow it down or calm it down from either side, and it's just eroding, what you could consider constitutional democracy in the United States. I mean, it's a country becoming more and more unrecognizable every day.
Yeah. Having grown up in Mississippi and, the bad days,
Right.
there's so many parallels of it. You couldn't trust law enforcement, which is what's
Right.
happening now. I mean, when Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman were killed by the Ku Klux Klan and put in a dam, we now know it was always a question like, how did the Klan know where they were? Well, they were stopped by a deputy sheriff who turned them over to the Klan. And
Right.
now you have Cash Patel. My father was an FBI agent.
Right.
You have Dan Bongino. These people, they're just thugs. And
to go from the integrity of the FBI. I mean, I'm a journalist. I interview a lot of cops,
yeah.
and to go from like the integrity of an FBI agent, which was primo. Like, I mean, I think of all the police forces I've ever researched in the world, it would be number one. To Cash Patel in a year is it's just breathtaking.
It's what
It's
Trump
just,
wants.
yeah.
I mean, well, look, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
A real pleasure. I have some questions for you, but I think they're going to have to wait for another time. I wanted to talk to you about the FCC ruling in the 80s and whether, as a media consultant, you thought that might have been the beginning of the end. That was
going back to the fairness doctrine getting thrown out.
Yeah, because some people have given that as an answer for the breakdown of things.
This book, Voices on the Right, I think it's called, by
No.
Oh, you should
I'll check it out.
Book moment here, just a second. Hemmer is her last name, Hemmer.
Oh,
She
I'll check it out. Voices on the Right, it's called?
Yeah, I think that's what
Yeah.
it's called. Something close to that. Hold on, let me get this right here before. She was she's an academic professor who saw an Iowa farm girl who saw her father go from being a messengers of the right Conservative Media and the Transformation of American Politics.
I
Nicole
think
Heming,
I have heard of that. I haven't read it.
H-E-M-I-N-G.
Yeah.
Listen, that it is. I thought I knew a lot about this just because I was
Right.
around campus. It was eye-opening. There it is, Messengers on the right. It's absolutely brilliant that, you know, she saw her nice Iowa sensible dad, farmer, become
Yeah.
this sort of right-wing and person. Like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
And so, being an academic, she said, "I'll study this." And it has some fascinating stuff. You know, there's a publication in America that was sort of a blueprint for the far right. And anyway, she gets into a lot of this.
Right.
It really is fascinating. And
I'll check it out.
what she posits is that the right wing developed a sense of otherness, that they had to be a voice, and there was not a mainstream equivalent of that, because those who were in the mainstream believed that the New York Times would do it, that, you know, the Washington Post would do it, that why do we need this? We are. And it all goes back. That publication is called Human Events. And when I was coming up, it was so right wing, we called it Inhuman Events. And I always thought it was started by two right wing lunatics, but it was actually started by two Haverford professors who were very anti-war. And they were convinced that in World War II that American journalism had become subjugated to a sort of jingoist pro-war mentality. One of them wrote an article for the Saturday Evening Post after Pearl Harbor, arguing why the United States shouldn't go to war.
Interesting.
It's like, you know, it's an interesting idea. I mean, like,
Yeah.
really. So out of that grew this sense of otherness. But it's, you know,
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating book.
Yeah.
So yes, I think the fairness doctrine had a lot to
Right.
do with it.
Yeah, maybe.
But I also think it all goes back to race. Look, you know,
Right.
Trump's coalition in 16 was 20%. I mean, it was 85% white.
Yeah.
It got a little better when he won in 24. It was 84% white.
Right.
That's in a country that's 59% white, and less so since we've been talking.
I think it's like 55 actually now.
Yeah.
It's getting down there. Yeah.
And all the Stephen Millers in the world aren't going to stop this.
No.
Whenever
Well, it's
I
one of
see,
those things like birth rate levels that like every
yeah,
government has a plan. You
whenever I
cannot
see
do
Stephen
anything.
Miller, I just sort of say to myself, like, this proves God has a sense of humor, because his children are going to grow up in a minority majority America.
Yeah, for sure.
Probably studying what a monster their father was.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thanks. Everybody should read this book. What I have to ask you the question I always hated when people would ask me. What are you working on now?
I'm working on a big book about the spiritual fallout of artificial intelligence.
Wow.
That's the next thing. Yeah. So
what a great topic. Wow.
I'm really excited to write it. It's very interesting. I mean, it's because there's this kind of return to religion in a bunch of places and
Wow,
that
it's
you wouldn't
fascinating.
expect. And like, and I don't think it's people suddenly thinking like, you know, God created the heavens and the earth in 7 days. It's more people realizing like, if you're going to live in an artificial society, you have to have a concept of the soul if you're going to survive, you know?
Wow.
And like, and so I think
Nobody's
it's that.
writing about this.
Yeah, I'm really excited to think about that because also I like to do these things where it's like, you know, I think it'll be very, you know, I'm an atheist. I was born an atheist. I've been an atheist my whole life, but I think it'll be very interesting to preachers, right? To religious people, because it is about like why people need religion, why religion is actually quite valuable, and why like we probably need it more than ever. Or not necessarily religion so much as the concept of the human spirit that we can, you know, that we can understand as just to escape from like the nihilism that we're talking, you know, the stuff that we're talking about now, which is this kind of
Completely nihilistic.
bizarre, nihilistic concept of personal egotism that's totally annihilating of all other values, right?
Yeah.
And like that seems to me like the question we have to start asking ourselves is how do we get out of that nihilism, right? Because it's so corrosive. It's just, I mean, it's corrosive of everything that conservatives wanted. It's corrosive of everything liberals wanted. It's not. It's just pure toxicity in itself.
And when's your estimated
I,
pub date for it?
next year, or probably the year after next, 2027.
Yeah.
Yeah, or spring of, yeah, a year and a half from now. Actually, I better go start writing that thing.
Okay, buddy. All right. Listen,
Yeah.
thank you for taking so much time. I've wanted to have this conversation ever since I read this book.
Great.
I just remember picking it up and reading this, and it was like, holy shit, what is this? I couldn't believe
Right.
that you had gone through all of these models, and it was so hyperbolic.
Right. Well, there's no need to be
It was
hyperbolic.
so grounded.
I
It
mean,
was like great satire acting. They just played it totally straight. We're not. There was no a wink and a nod, and we're going to exaggerate this. And
no need to. It's way dangerous enough.
yeah,
Like, there's no need to exaggerate a thing. It's all, the trouble is obvious.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen. Thanks to everybody.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you.
for
Wonderful
joining.
conversation. Yeah.
I just got to put a pitch in here for Lincoln Square. We saw again last night why media in this country, as we've known it, is completely collapsing.
Yeah, you needed more than ever, that's for sure.
And we need it more than ever. Yeah, absolutely.
No.
And we got two Canadians, Stephen Marche and David Frum, who we should be very thankful for. All right, everybody. Thanks.
Yeah.
Read The Next Civil War, and look forward to seeing you.